In just a minute, I'll introduce our special guest, Lucien Greaves, also known as Doug Mesner of the Satanic Temple. But I want to be sure you know a couple of things before we get started. We really miss seeing all of you in person at our monthly educational events, but we're planning more and more online events like this one to help fill the time until we can get together again. To find out about all those events in advance and to get log-on information for our webinars, which are on Sunday afternoons every other week, where you can ask questions and interact in chat, go to our meetup group at meetup.com/CFL Freethought. These will not be posted as events in advance on our Facebook page, but we also have a full schedule of Freethought Cafe online events as well. So if you're looking to connect socially while you socially distance, we have some options there for you. You can also find us on Facebook at CFL Freethought and on the web at CFL Freethought. With that, I'll go ahead and welcome Lucien to the broadcast. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. We got a wet day after a long dry period here in Florida, so it's we're not wasting our time inside, but getting outside is not happening quite as much as it used to. How have you been going in this lockdown that we've got ourselves in?
Well, it's the opposite for us. We had a long, wet, windy period, and now today it's clear, and seems like everybody's out. Traffic is heavy. People are out walking around. The whole social distancing thing hasn't really caught on here yet, disappointingly enough, but I'm sure reality will strike rather soon.
Yeah, it's kind of a good thing that it's going to be different around the country. You know, if we were all on the same curve, I think we'd be in for a lot worse situation. But it's not going to be good either way. But it was about a year ago that you were last down here. You came to screen one of the last trips that you made on the screening tour for Hail Satan. And I got to say that with an upward inflection, Hail Satan. We really enjoyed having you here for the Florida Film Festival last year. So tell us kind of how that was going. And if you want to talk about the Satanic Temple a little bit more in depth for those folks who are not as familiar with your work, please feel free to do that and tell us how the promotion of the movie was. I'm sure that was different than your regular activism.
Well, right. I mean, the first really interesting difference once the Hail Satan film came out was how journalists handled me. I was really used to hostile interviews before Hail Satan, and it didn't take very long. In fact, the film hadn't even had its first premiere at Sundance yet before some of the mainstream press had seen screeners, I guess, and were doing interviews with me for mainstream papers, and starting out by saying things to me like, you know, we think what you're doing is very inspirational and uplifting. And that was a real bizarre reversal for me, having been used to going into interviews and being attacked and made to defend myself. There were certain circumstances where I wondered if they were quite clear on who they were talking to. And then I got used to that kind of behavior, that kind of interaction with journalists. And it's bizarre how comfortable you can get with things. I was very uncomfortable at first being a spokesperson for something so controversial and being attacked all the time. And then when I found that things took a 180, I was almost very uncomfortable with that for a little while. But, you know, more and more people, once the film circulated and once people watched it, had a better understanding of what the Satanic Temple is. Disappointingly, some people watched the whole film and still had their whole own unique perception of what the Satanic Temple is, and would try to join our ranks and going through that kind of period now. But at least I think at the core of it, most everybody who's heard about us, most everybody who's seen the film, knows the basics, that we are a non-theistic religious organization, meaning that we don't subscribe to any supernatural belief system, but we do take ourselves seriously as a religious community, fully deserving of the privileges and exemptions that are conferred upon become aware of the types of legal battles we fight for separation of church and state, secularism, bodily autonomy, and those types of things that are in alignment with our values. And I did appreciate that the film didn't focus just on one thing or the other. It showed that we do have a robust internal community where people have that sense of religious fellowship. But it also showed those outward-facing things that we do, those important battles that we fight. So in that way, the film has been a really good thing. For me, it was an upheaval, not just in the changing perceptions that people had, but just in my day-to-day work. There was a long period of time there after Hail Satan was out where most of what I was doing was going around. So much seemed film related. And I was feeling like I was just really getting in my stride, getting back to work and working on new projects, in fact, and had a whole kind of tour lined up for this year of lectures. And I made an album with a band and we were going to tour for that. And I was trying to line up my schedule so I could do speaking engagements along with that. Mm-hmm. In any case, this was really going to be a breakout year for me. And then the plague struck. So I'll have to do it all from inside via Zoom meetings and the rest.
Yeah, I hope it goes as best as it can. It's hard to monetize and promote, when you have to do it this way. I think all groups that are going online are struggling, from religious to non-religious to businesses that aren't selling to-go food, right, are really struggling. So we are, our hearts with you on that. And I'm sorry to hear that, but we'll certainly have you down to Florida and pay you to come as soon as we can do that. So looking forward to that. So a couple things you said triggered some thoughts in my mind. So non-theistic religion. It's an oxymoron for people who don't define the term religion and theism the same ways as perhaps you and I would in this context. But I'll mention a couple, and you expound on this if you like. The Humanist Society, in fact, which has ordained myself and many others, is a non-theistic religious organization. Some Buddhist sects are non-theistic religions. Any others come to mind when you get asked that question? Is what is a non-theistic religion?
Yeah, the Jains, Confucianism. There's quite a few. And it's not something we created, and a notion we created just to be clever. And as much as I enjoy the writings of some of the new atheists, and I enjoyed Christopher Hitchens' book subtitled "Religion Poisons Everything," it was disappointing to me that religion was used as a shorthand term to embody superstition in general. Yeah. When I really think that those things should be separated. And we do run into some pushback sometimes from people who don't want religion defined as anything other than supernaturalism, superstition, faith in things that cannot be proven, and that type of thing. And I think that's really, really self-damaging, at the point where you really do have these legal privileges and exemptions given to religions. You're only harming yourself by defining yourself out of a protected class when you have deeply held beliefs that are worth protecting. And honestly, I think we have all of the elements, all of the enriching elements that a religion should have without the supernaturalism. And the IRS has defined us as a tax-exempt religious organization now. Recently, we had a trial in Arizona where we were suing the city of Scottsdale for not allowing us to give an invocation. And while the judge did rule that we didn't prove with a preponderance of evidence that it was discrimination upon which the decision was based to not have us speak, which I thought was absurd, the judge nonetheless ruled that we were in every way a religious organization under the law and deserve to be treated as such. So to engage in viewpoint discrimination against us, if he felt that were proven, would be a violation of our civil liberties. So at this point, I feel that if it had gone the other way, if the IRS had said no to us and a federal judge had also said that we didn't have that type of standing, still be here as a Satanist community, and then what would you do with us?
Right. When I think about religion, I mean, there's a lot of space between, fundamentalist religious belief, supernatural is everything, God's law, and football, right? I mean, you guys are nowhere near football is a religion kind of arguments about what the word religion means. You guys are much farther down towards the theistic side of this, and I realize, there's a bit of a dichotomy, and we're trying to put it on a spectrum, but we're not talking about religion like I do something religiously, right? We're talking a little more, down the spectrum of theistic religion when you start talking about TST and other religions, right?
Yeah, but you can look at those extremes on the spectrum, but you don't even have to go that far. You can look at our opposition sometimes and see how critical some of the questions, some of the theocratic evangelical organizations that are trying for nothing short of a coup of the United States government.
Right.
Because we run into these questions, like when I've been in depositions or when we were on trial in Arizona, these questions about whether or not our political activities render us merely political rather than religious. And I think that's ironic given that the case on the other side was being pushed by the Alliance Defending Freedom, which, as some might know, is part of that kind of Project Blitz network of theocratic organizations that appears on the face of it to be solely political. So I don't mind these questions being posed to us so long as people can turn the mirror upon themselves and see exactly what we're dealing with. So on every level of this, you know, we have people questioning our authenticity, and when they fail to look at the other side and ask, well, at what point do we demand that people take the Bible literally before we judge them serious as a religion?
Right.
Those questions don't come up often enough. I one time presented the analogy of the Jedi Church, which I think is more popular in the UK. You have these people who've taken the Star Wars mythology and turned it into their own kind of, I don't know if they consider it a parody religion or if it's kind of a hobby for some of them. But in any case, I was wondering, you know, the UK government wouldn't recognize them as a legitimate religion. And I'm not sure what they base that decision on or not.
Right.
But I think it's an interesting question to ask, where if you had some subset of the Jedis who all of a sudden decided against all evidence that the Star Wars films were documentaries of types, that George Lucas, whether he knew it or not, was channeling some kind of truth about some historical events somewhere outside our galaxy elsewhere, and decided that this was all true, this all happened, and therefore they're going to adjust their behavior accordingly to align themselves with the Force or whatever. Would their deeply held beliefs based on that crazy premise be more worthy of protection than people who have a rational view of the universe? I mean, to me, that's just, it's insane to give heightened privilege to superstition or irrational thought over deeply held beliefs predicated on rational thinking and some kind of humanistic interest. But that's where we're at.
Right. Yeah. When you start talking about, you know, morality and religion, the people that are only a light touch on religion or even atheism are not able to talk about that in a way that's actually sensible. And I enjoy conversations with members of clergy that are friends of mine and atheists that are friends of mine about these questions from a perspective of, you know, it's not about what God says, it's about what happens here on earth. And I think that's pretty fundamental for a lot of folks that are listening. So let's move on. So I want to just touch real quickly on, and before I do, I'll mention that I met a few dozen TST members and fans from across the state at a recent event. And started to build some relationships with these folks. In fact, that was a year ago at the film screening when I first connected, but they had a fundraiser to try to start a chapter. And a little bit later, we'll bring on two people that are helping lead the way for a chapter in Central Florida, Lilith and Omen Faust. But the allyship between your organization and ours started all the way back in 2013, 2014, when we started up against Orange County Public Schools for the Bible distribution. And just a quick recap of that. And then I want you to layer on top of this, your perspective is, you know, we heard in 2013 about the second year in January, there's a National Religious Freedom Day. Look that up if you want to know the background. There's good and bad on that. But they had, for 2 years, put Bibles into public schools as a passive distribution. They had permission to go in and throw them on a table and leave and come back and replenish them, but not talk to the students. That was the plan. We got wind of it in 2013, requested to participate, had our materials censored. We did, in fact, on the National Day of Reason / Prayer in 2013, put materials into schools against our better judgment, the same way you do your activism. You do this because others are doing it, not because you want to do it, and we have answered those questions. And then we basically found out months later that they were, you know, once we sued them for that censorship, that they're like, okay, you can do what you want. You can put your stuff into the school. Next year, you can participate. We didn't get to because the case was still going on. But in 2015, everything was about to happen. when it comes to putting everybody out there. The Christians and the atheists were the only people playing the game. And then you guys had this brilliant idea. And you and I got connected, I think, in 2013, but I'm not sure where the Satanic Children's Book of Big Book of Activities came up. So tell us a little bit about that, and if you want to, how you kind of saved the day here for us in Central Florida.
It was just actually really fortuitous. We already had this children's big book of satanic activities created and the art ready. So I think it was the Freedom from Religion Foundation that reached out to us and said they're doing this passive distribution. They were in contact with you, and there were already people from the Freedom from Religion Foundation that viewed us as the nuclear option when it came to this new tactic by the evangelical theocrats, when they would claim that is similar to the monument campaigns, that they're private donations, some private groups doing it. There isn't viewpoint discrimination, so it would be simple religious discrimination to not allow them to go on the public space and proselytize or whatever. And it's always put to the test, of course, when Satanists come in. Can people tolerate that? Or do they really understand the ramifications of what they're suggesting? Do they really have this dedication to the open forum that they claim they have when they don't think that there's going to be any opposing viewpoints there? So we were reached out to and told about this passive distribution of the Bibles at the schools. And we had already made this book of activities because we were posting it just as a supplementary download PDF item on a website we were setting up to assert exemption for people who wanted to exempt their children from corporal punishment in schools where it was still allowed.
Right.
All the empirical evidence is against the idea that corporal punishment, beating children is a corrective measure that results in any good. These assertions, these religious assertions that you spare the rod, spoil the child, or whatever. So it is kind of a religious battle at the bottom of it. So we decided we could just print these out, staple them together, and have that given out as the passive distribution. Our contact at the Freedom from Religion Foundation had told us that given the situation in Orange County, where they'd already established this free speech spot for courts, I guess, we were advised that we could be of the other guy's religion, whatever we really wanted. Mm-hmm. But we said we really didn't have any interest in that, and we didn't need to. And Florida, I remembered watching the Orange County School Board talk about this, and it was already getting a lot of press, the idea that these satanic books would be put out for passive distribution. And they were trying to allay the public's fears by saying they still held the ultimate veto power on this, which wasn't really true. They couldn't just say they didn't like us because of our viewpoint. But I think they were really counting on us giving them something offensive enough that they could make an argument for public decency or profanity or pornography. And I think they were willing to try to find anything that they could fit into that category. And I remembered seeing the legal counsel for the school board speaking at the school board meeting, and you could just hear and see the disappointment coming from him when he was saying, like, I've got nothing. This is untouchable.
Yep.
It was just a pro-social messages, coloring pages, and that kind of thing. And no credible argument against its content other than, what would fall within viewpoint discrimination.
Yeah.
So they decided, instead of the horror of having these booklets handed out to children, that they would finally that was another time, I guess, just like with every time, the hypocrisy was amazing. I remember the group that was responsible for either trying to litigate this on behalf of the evangelicals, or the group that was responsible for the passive distribution, was saying in one of the news broadcasts that he felt that our agenda, as it was, had nothing to do with our religion as such, or a religious viewpoint, but it was just something to provoke and offend them. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was interesting, because here it is, we, especially then, we didn't have the local chapter presences that we have now. We certainly don't have all the real estate of churches on every corner. We don't have our word on billboards all across the nation, or for passive distribution in so many places like they do. And yet this idea that we would use any avenue available to let people know who we were was viewed merely as an agitation. And it made you wonder, well, what then is their excuse for needing to use a public school to put out their literature when they have all these other resources available to them, when everybody already knows it's important for them to install themselves in the schools? And of course, part of the whole evangelical agenda is they feel called to do this. They feel that if they get into the schools, it shows that they have, to the younger children at least, it gives the impression that the schools endorse this message, that this is the proper viewpoint that they should conform to. And it's similar to the good news clubs who try to install their after school clubs in the schools to evangelize and tell children that if they don't act in alignment with some fundamentalist interpretation of gospel, that they will be forever tormented in hell. They feel they need to do this to people who don't already share their beliefs. Mm-hmm. It's not an internal thing for them. It's about propagandizing, and it's about bringing people in, and especially when they're at a very young age. There's a great book about this, Catherine Stewart's Good News Club's book, but it talks about some of the documentation that she gained from this movement. And they actually do target a certain age window, 4 to 14, they think is less questioning of the obviously bizarre supernatural viewpoints that they're trying to instill in them.
Yeah. So we're fortunate to be both friends with Catherine, you knowing her from where she lives up in the Northeast and doing work and kind of talking about your organization in many cases. We as well, in fact, one of our board members, Joseph Richardson, has in her new book that we're going to talk about with her in 2 weeks right here, he's featured in that, and activism that he was engaged in here. And I'm not through the book yet, but I went ahead and jumped into that chapter. And we're excited to talk to Catherine on this event in 2 weeks. And I do want to recognize that we do have some bandwidth challenges. We don't know where they are. Of course, on this viewing end, I look great. On your end, you probably look great. But when you're coming through to me, it's a little bit slow, even the audio as well. So we are recording it. Hopefully the recording will be salvageable and we will repost. So I do want to ask a couple of questions that we got in the meetup group. Thanks to everybody for RSVPing there. And looks like we've got a pretty good turnout here. Let's see what our participants are right now. We've got 56 people participating, so that's great. So Kaz and Pam H both asked this question, and I've kind of put it together here. What do you make of the idea that governors and others think they don't have the authority to close churches by executive order in the same way that any other businesses and nonprofits can be closed during this pandemic? Have you had any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think it kind of shows the power of the religious lobby, and nobody wants to be the one to also put the hammer down on the churches, even in the name of public safety. And I think that's really on us. The social prohibition against allowing people's religious viewpoints to trump reality really falls on us to build that sense of social prohibition. We need to speak out more against it. I mean, everybody tries to strike that balance between not being the antagonistic asshole atheist online, which we've all seen and recognize as tedious. But when it comes to matters like this, you do have to take the point of view that somebody's comfort in their superstition does not trump the general public health, and especially in something like this, when the messaging to the people who want to congregate and have their religious fellowship could just as easily do it online like we do. It would be very easy for the religious leaders to be putting out a more sensible message to people about how, they do have some kind of civic duty in the real world to practice some kind of social distancing and make sure that they do not harm their congregation. I mean, you can use the Bible any way you want to go. You could pull that whole God helps them who helps themselves type of thing, and just remind people that to a certain degree, we do live in the real world, and the virus is not partisan. You hear this ridiculous talk from guys like Franklin Graham now, who I see, in a popular clip that's distributing today, is saying that COVID-19, of course, is God's revenge for people turning their back on him. And there was another high-profile idiot, I forget which one, but one of these mega pastors or whatever, who actually went so far as to say that COVID-19 was striking the Jewish population because of their failure to recognize Christ the prophet. And he had no commentary, I guess, as to why it was also striking so many church congregations as well, which is an obvious question for this. But, now all those questions I think about the efficacy of prayer and that type of thing are very legitimate questions. If they're going to have a National Prayer Day, and Asa Hutchinson in Arkansas is going to call for statewide prayer to end COVID-19, we should ask them for a timeline and what kind of results we can expect if their prayers work, and measure those against the epidemiologists' predictions of when we might expect a vaccination and that type of thing. I just think that we shouldn't be is tolerant, I think, of this when the public health is at stake, and we should be vocal about it to our politicians and to our congressmen. We should be very open about our concerns about the public health and safety when churches are congregating. We should be very openly critical of church leaders when they say that they're going to defy these orders, and we should be very that they feel that their God will somehow protect them from the ravages of this disease. And we should not be light-handed in pointing out to them the number of people already that have fallen to that point of view. And I can only hope that when this is said and done, people do think a bit more clearly about some of these issues, particularly climate change, because I see so many parallels to that here. I'm hoping that people will see the warnings of scientists and realize that these aren't just the paranoid rantings of catastrophists when they talk about climate change and the change in lifestyle that could affect us. People have been used to living their entire lives and feeling that these things are scientific scenarios, and they don't realize that they're the frog in the slowly boiling water. I haven't seen as much change in thought as I would hope yet, but I mean, I just have to keep in mind that I myself have only been in lockdown here for not even a month, and so that does allow a lot of time for people to change their viewpoint. But just like with climate change, I see the issue of encroaching theocracy similarly to the onset of COVID-19 and people's failure to adjust. We have all these early warnings, and they're not being heeded. We see the encroachments of theocratic politicians. We see more and more politicians are theocrats, even as church might be dwindling. It doesn't matter. For a lot of these people, it really is about power.
Yeah.
And this is something that they really leverage to get there. And all those early warning signs are in place, and they're eroding our democracy bit by bit. And I'm hoping that people, if nothing else, realize that the worst case scenarios really can happen, and we see them happening. And if we don't do anything, we're going to wake up, in a theocracy in the same way we woke up one day finding ourselves in a plague state.
Yeah. So I do want to point out, based on what you just said, that the Freedom from Religion Foundation, our parent organization in the CFFC, put out an action alert, one or two in the last couple of weeks about governors, and what we talked about regarding allowing churches to continue to serve by having open doors. And also, I was on a call a couple weeks ago listening in as Marco Rubio reminded all the pastors in Florida that as long as God's law isn't violated, then we can follow man's law. it was
Well,
extreme.
I just see in the chat that the person who asked the question also says Pennsylvania's governor wants to put a law for a day of humiliation, prayer, and fasting to fight COVID-19. And there again, I feel like too often we give a pass to politicians saying that they subscribe to a supernatural belief system because there's that prevalent notion that they have to, you know,
Yeah.
and everybody gives them a pass. Well, they need to do that for the voters.
Right.
But I do think that, you know, we can't expect them to be disparaging of a majority religious viewpoint, and they probably shouldn't be, right? But I do think it's real fair game to ask politicians what the limits are on their superstitious beliefs and how far are they willing to bring their religion into their politics. And in that sense, it's completely fair to discriminate against them as a voter if they're going to fall back on just absolute superstition for their policies. And things like calling for a day of humiliation, prayer, and fasting, that should be something that is an item of embarrassment for the governor going forward. I mean, the governor should have to answer to whether he or not he feels, he or she, I'm not sure, feels that that's actually a productive message to put out to people at a time like this when they should be working with the best real world scientific evidence for the problem at hand. And it's not just for their own good, of course, it's for the good of everybody around us. And that's where the problem is. I mean, we could go off on a whole tangent about how the greater good now is a whole new question to people when it comes to questions of like universal health care and workers' rights and compensation and that type of thing. And as I said, hopefully this whole event, despite the terrible losses we have, will give us some kind of context for doing better in the future.
Yeah. Well, you and I talked on your Patreon podcast about 2 weeks ago, I think, about how the anti-vax movement would be affected about this. I'm not sure if it was before or after we were recording, but I think this is extremely interesting. And I'm not in that bubble, right? I'm on the opposite bubble. So I'm not seeing perhaps the results of this. But I'd be curious to know from my friends if we could, get some threads going on Facebook to hear about this. How are your friends feeling this is going? But have you probably have a bubble the same way many of us do and probably aren't seeing this. But I think it'll be interesting to see how the anti-vaxxers move on this when we do have a vaccine in the next year or so.
I still, like I said, I still have hope, even though I'm disappointed now at how slow people are to catch up regarding the reality of this situation. I think like after several waves of this, because the idea is we're going to peak, decline, then there's going to be outbreaks, schools are going to shut down again, that kind of thing. That's going to happen until probably around fall of 2021 is about when we can expect vaccination day to come.
Yeah.
And that's a long time. I mean, it's felt like a long time, this like some 3 weeks that I've been in this house, but I'm dedicated to laying low throughout the entirety of this.
Speaking of this, let's move on to a couple more things here, and then let's get off of this subject, at least of the coronavirus. But so Christian asked our own Florida Senator Marco Rubio, speaking of him, and others were early in advocating for nonprofits, including churches, to receive some of the coronavirus stimulus. So her question is a good one. Will TST show up with a gilded treasure chest to make a point of how horrible an idea that is?
Well, I mean, the real question is, I don't know. I mean, honestly, we have to look into it. But for us, if we're looking at getting part of that stimulus package, it's not so much about showing them about the equal application of these types of things. It's more about actually keeping ourselves afloat. We have our headquarters. We have legal bills. We have a lot of other expenses that now like everybody else that's dried up quite a bit. So when it comes to the stimulus package, we really actually have to look into what can be gained from it. So we haven't really done that yet. But yeah, it's not even a concern of ours whether doing this is something that can prove to them that this is a bad idea or not. It's actually something that we might need to do to stay afloat ourselves. So that's the depressing reality of it.
Yeah. Well, while we're on the subject, and I'll ask you again at the end, go ahead and let folks know where they can find you personally and professionally at TST, and how they can throw some support your way. And then I'll bring that back up again at the end.
Yeah, well, check out our website, thesatanictemple.com. And if you buy merchandise from us, and we had gotten a bunch of merchandise just made before this struck, not knowing, of course, that this was going to strike. This was in production well before the reports were coming out from Wuhan, or before we were paying attention to them.
I heard you guys were the cause of this, so I don't know that I believe that.
Right. But if you want some Satan swag, that helps support us. I've made my material for the course of the pandemic free on my Patreon. But if people can subscribe, that's what helps carry me through during this. And as I said, this all comes as a disappointment, because I really had a full schedule lined up where this was really going to be the breakout year. But at least now I have enough of a following that I do have subscribers on my Patreon. That is something that can help.
Yeah,
help
and you're doing this.
by.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt there. You're doing this full time. This is your full-time job. I'm not sure if you consider yourself an employee of TST or if you're just a volunteer, but I think it's important to support what you do. And that's why I'm a supporter of TST and a subscriber to your Patreon. And I think you can still donate at this time. You're just saying you don't have to donate to get the content, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And I could draw it would be legitimate for me to draw a salary from TST. That's how these businesses are constructed, and I do go full time, but I had determined some time ago that I would make myself self-sufficient on this, and that's why I recorded an album. That's why I take my speakers' fees. I have my Patreon. That's where I get my income from. So I don't draw a income from TST, because TST has enough difficulty staying afloat, paying its own legal bills and all the rest. So, that's gotten a lot better since the documentary has come out, of course. And that's what made doing a documentary and makes some of the public-facing press we get worthwhile. People find out that they want to identify with us, they want to be with us, that they support the things that we do. But the fact of the matter is, it's going to be difficult for everybody. The economy's tanking. A lot of people, I can't even really complain, because I see people working retail and being made to come into retail jobs where in areas where people aren't cognizant enough to stay out of crowds and are going and shopping in mobs. I talked to a woman who works for Michael's recently on my Patreon to do an interview just last week or the week before. She said they refused to shut down, classified themselves as an essential business, and she was in fear for her life because she's, I think, both elderly and immunocompromised. But this whole occasion is laying bare some real issues that need to be confronted. There I go, right back on the topic again that we were getting away from.
No, that's okay. I think it's fine. It's on everybody's minds right now, and hopefully this video will have some longevity, but I think this is a big deal, and we're focused on the now, not necessarily the building content for the future. I forgot what I was going to mention, but we can, let's talk about this. So I know a lot's changed since Hail Satan came out last year, but here's a question from April. Are you surprised by any beneficial relationships TST has made? And what about those who have considered themselves opposition at times? Any surprises there?
I don't think we're necessarily seeing people who had considered themselves opposition coming around to embracing us. But I think what we're seeing more of are people who were rooting for us from the sidelines, feeling more comfortable being vocal about it and upfront about it now.
Right.
And I think in general, as much as we might like to unnuance the conversation and look at things in black and white and say Christians are stupid and you know, this is the side to be on and that kind of thing. It must be said that there is a growing community of more progressive Christians who are becoming more and more vocal against the theocratic movement within the United States. And something I often point out and pointed out in most Q&As I did after the Hail Satan film would premiere at a place, was something that the film didn't show, was that in that final climactic rally that was taking place in Arkansas, I was just the headlining speaker. We had a couple of pastors, Christian pastors from Arkansas, also speaking at that rally, speaking in defense of the separation of church and state and government viewpoint neutrality. They knew they were going to be on the stage with the Baphomet monument there. They knew that I was the headline speaker. They were not caught unawares by any of this. And they're local in Arkansas, in the Christian community, and they were willing to do that. I mean, that's more bold, I think, than myself standing up on the stage. I mean, they have to live with that every day. I was getting a lot of death threats about the fact that I was going to arrive there, but afterwards I was able to leave, right? So I think there are a lot of people who still identify as Christian who are simply fed up with people in the government trying to take ownership of what they hold sacred. Mm-hmm. And I think we should be open to working with that. We should be open to understanding, as they should understand about us, that different symbols and different mythologies can mean different things to different people, and we can have aligned values in many ways, and we shouldn't deny that when that is the case.
Yeah. So I think one of the most sobering things about the film, and we were fortunate to see this with you at the Enzion Theater here in the Florida Film Festival last year. One of the most sobering things, it's really entertaining, throughout, but and educational as well. I learned some things, having been involved as a supporter of TST for years. I learned some things, and it was a blast. But one of the most sobering things was the seriousness of the death threats and how you had to take those seriously. And I'm sure you'd love to be able to divine which ones are real and which ones are not real. But hopefully, those are not as common as they were. But I guess they're going to come and go, and that was extremely sobering for me as a viewer. And our allies, to the topic of allyship, our allies here in Central Florida are becoming the progressive religious leaders of the Interfaith Council, particularly Christians that are outspoken in favor of inclusion of freethinkers, the Freethought community here we have as part of the Interfaith Council. So we're really excited about that. We're not going to convince all evangelicals and people that are fundamentalists to support separation of church and state, but as you well know, there's a strain of Baptists that are very supportive of it. And I think folks should look up Roger Williams and the Baptist Joint Committee if they're interested in knowing more about how all Baptists aren't necessarily of the same ilk.
But on the other side of that, of course, things are getting further and further polarized. You'll find the extremes really doubling down and growing in ranks, and somebody's going to get hurt. Again, to bring up Catherine Stewart, and I don't want to necessarily speak for her because she's going to be on later, but she has been a close friend of mine for the years in which I've been doing this, and she lives nearby to me, and we've actually been doing weekly Skype meeting drinking sessions during this lockdown. And I think that her book, The Power Worshippers, is one of the most important books to come out in a long time. And I encourage everybody to read that. But to the point we were talking to earlier with death threats, she recently did an opinion piece in the New York Times talking about how this kind of this poor response that the United States has had to the pandemic right now was primed by this marriage of politics and religion, science denialism, and Trump's pandering to a superstitious base that is willing to put their individual good over the greater good as a matter of noble religious duty and pride, and also view any type of government action at all or benefit as some kind of satanic communist, talking about these ideas that are very straightforward to me. And she got a flood of death threats from Christian nationalists, neo-Nazis that support those Christian nationalists, and all the rest. And it's very disturbing to me how quickly people receive death threats for expressing basic viewpoints like this. With the advent of the internet, we really hope that people would hone their debate skills and people would learn to reason these things out because they had to argue them in text. And as I do this, the death threats are far more common and far quicker to come. And I don't know how much of that is the product of my growing population, of an increasing number of people. Their first response is to send a death threat about something rather than consider the other point of view. And that's really disturbing to me.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, when we talk about why, when we hear arguments about, well, why don't you release the names of the plaintiffs, or why don't the people that complain to the school board have to show their faces? This is it right here, right? This is exactly why. It's appalling to me that we have to keep ourselves hidden, and particularly because of our jobs, because of our well-being, just because of our lives sometimes.
Politicians have taken advantage of this mob outrage too. Senator Rapert, who's kind of the nemesis senator character in Arkansas, when I was attending his deposition in Arkansas, he saw it appropriate to post that I was going to be there, when I was going to be there, and where exactly the location was on his social media. And I feel like there was no reason for him to do that, other than to kind of try to intimidate or harass, or otherwise hope that one of the people sending me death threats would come through. And I mean, to me, that's very distressing. And in Missouri, where we had our lawsuit against abortion restrictions, the case is still going through appeal in the courts right now. But in direct response to us having an anonymous plaintiff for that case, they tried passing a law specifically about church-state cases too, to take away the standing for any anonymous plaintiffs. And what could possibly be the purpose of that, but to try to harass and intimidate people away from having the audacity to question these religious encroachments into the public square. And to me, it's just infuriating that that would even be suggested.
Yeah, no kidding. So I appreciate all the questions that are coming in. Doug, you and I have talked a lot in the past, and we could talk for hours here. One question while we're queuing up Oman and Lily, how many members do you have in TST? And, people view it as not legitimate because it's small, but I think it looks small because people see a lot of you and not a lot of people waving flags. And when you are out waving flags, it's honestly not a big group. And we've talked about the reasons why in the past, the fear and the reason that people have to use pseudonyms and disguises just to be comfortable coming out and participating in those events. But talk about how many members you have.
I don't know. I've been holding at the number of 100,000, and sometimes we're criticized for only requiring a membership that people just sign up online. That's as accurate as our count is. We don't charge for membership. Of course, if you want to order a certificate or card or whatever, I mean, there's an expense that goes along with that for us. We ship it out. So there's a charge for people who want those, but you don't need those to be a member. And from the very beginning, we decided we didn't want a fee associated with people identifying with us. So you just sign up online. So to that end, we had 100,000 some time ago at the beginning of Hail Satan coming out. And I honestly haven't checked the metrics since then, so it's over that. But that's, if that's a real indication of people who identify with us, that's certainly not an insignificant population, and it deserves to be reckoned with in future Pew polls.
Absolutely. So I'm going to just stop my video to try to save us some space here, and also ask if we can go ahead and unmute if they're muted, Oman and Lily Faust. So Just want to point out, we've got some friends of the Satanic Temple here in Central Florida, and broader than that. They're joining us to talk about their work to build a chapter. First of all, can you hear us, and can you talk to us, Oman and Lily?
David, I can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yep, you sound great. You really appreciate you joining us, and probably better off that you're not sharing video at the moment. We're having a little trouble, but I think we got good signal now with me perhaps having video off. So how's the work going on chapter formation? If you want to just catch us up on this, and we are going to go a little over 4 o'clock, so we'll spend probably 5 or 10 minutes with you.
Sure thing. So Central Florida actually covers North and Central Florida, and kind of all the way down into Fort Myers. We have active groups that do meet up and have socials in the Tampa area, Orlando area, Space Coast, Jacksonville, and we have a small group starting up in Gainesville. I did want to mention that there is an official chapter in West Florida, up in the Pensacola area. Once we're official, we're going to reach out to them and see how we can work together to build that community as well. Back in February, we had our qualifying event we held in Orlando, and it was a fundraiser for TST, and we raised just over $4,000 for the, and we were super excited for TST to use for their campaigns and lawyer bills, and just to help the cause, because we believe it's important. Within the coming weeks, we should be an official chapter. Great.
Well, you're in my thoughts and prayers for that, for sure. So that'll help. So, and while we've got Lucien here, I know you probably interact with him on a somewhat limited basis because there's a whole structure of the organization, and Doug is a co-founder and a spokesperson, but not necessarily running all of the day-to-day. So if you had any questions or comments for him, now's the time. We'll certainly give you an opportunity to do that, and then we'll talk about where we can find more of what's going on with your group in Florida.
No, I want to thank you, David, for inviting us to be a part of this, and obviously for Lucien to come talk to CFFC. And we met you back in April during Hail Satan in Orlando, so it's always good to see you.
That was a great event. That was a great theater. I love the theaters where they have the tables set up and serve snacks and everything. That's a great place.
Yeah, it's a fun place to do that, and they have the film festival there every year, and they have memberships and lots of kind of off the wall eclectic movies and pretty good food and a full bar outside as well. So please check that out, and so tell folks where they can find you in the Central Florida group, and how they can connect, because I've got big hopes and dreams for the work we can do with TST in Florida.
We're excited as well. We have a great group. You can find us on our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/TST-CentralFL. And from there, you can, if you want to get involved in our Facebook group, there's a private group you can visit, and you can, we do ask you to answer some qualifying questions. So please take those seriously. And, we look forward to allies and fellow Satanists alike.
That's great. And you have some stuff going on now while we're in social distancing as well, right?
Yeah, we do have our various divisions are doing social virtual meets where they just get together and hang out and maybe do a movie watch, or I think we had some people playing some card games virtually. Mm-hmm. We also have a standing last Friday virtual meet for statewide. So it's, we're doing our best to keep the community, together and active, and do what we can during this difficult time.
Well, let me say, if any of you have these kinds of social events running online during this pandemic, and you want me to kind of give it a signal boost, just tag me on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter and tag me there, because a lot of people following me on the Twitter are now looking for the movie nights we're doing via cast or whatever else. So I'm trying to be a repository for people who are scheduling these kinds of events to keep people less secluded during isolation.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, well, thanks to you two for joining and for your advocacy. We're really, really glad to have kind of this idea that we'll have some opportunities to work on issues together in Central Florida and beyond. And Central Florida, by the way, is kind of the I-4 corridor, right? You want to clarify that a little bit before we let you go?
Yeah, I mean, it really is. We go all the way down to Fort Myers on the West Coast, up to Pasco County, all the way across to the Space Coast, up to Jacksonville, and a little bit north of Orlando into the Gainesville area currently. I know we have other areas that are looking to get active. So, just reach out if you want to get active with us. And, we're all about building our community and getting like-minded people together and seeing what we can do for the future.
That's great. That's great. Anything else for Omen and Lily before we let them go, Doug?
I heard great things. You guys are doing a great job, and looking forward to onboarding you in the near future.
Fantastic.
All right. Hey, bye, you two. Have a good rest of the day, and then go wash your hands, okay?
Oh, yep.
All right. So let me pop my video back on, see if we can make that work. So Doug, before we let you go, talk a little bit about other issues, right? Because you have the organization has its hands in a lot of things, right? It's not just about invocations or statues versus monuments. You're working on other issues, reproductive rights, et cetera. You want to give us a quick synopsis of what that is, and then we'll work our way through the rest of the show here.
Yeah, a lot of the legal cases people saw being worked on in the Hail Satan film are still in process. Like I said, it was only January, I believe it was, when we finally went to court in federal court in Arizona about invocation that we had tried to give in Scottsdale that they had approved us for and then rescinded. And as I also mentioned, that was kind of a mixed judgment there. We were deemed legitimate, but the judge said he just wasn't totally convinced that the reason was discrimination, that they rescinded our invitation, even though it's difficult to imagine what other reason was supposed to have been at play. The reproductive rights, that's always relevant. People often wonder why we're not pursuing more lawsuits in that regard, but it takes a lot to have standing. You actually need a plaintiff. You can't just say this violates, this in theory violates our beliefs. It needs to be directly violating somebody's beliefs. And in the case of Missouri, we needed now 2 pregnant plaintiffs to feel oppressed by the abortion restrictions in place, and as members of TST, and then agree to be plaintiffs to give us standing to help sue the state. And then, of course, we have to fight the battle to keep them anonymous while politicians try to make them public just to try to make things dangerous for them, I guess. Of course, there is that Baphomet lawsuit in Arkansas. We were scheduled for trial in July, but now everything's up in the air. I guess, courts have been shut down. It's been, it's going to be at least a couple months before courts are going to be back in session. I don't know how far that will push back some of the lawsuits that we're doing. We were going to have a reproductive rights rally in Utah this month before, of course, this all came to a head and we can't congregate in that way anymore. And we had put our after-school Satan clubs in place to kind of counteract the good news clubs that I had been talking about earlier in this discussion. Our problem there is that our liability insurance, the insurance company that was covering our liability, refused to cover us when they realized who we were. And we don't even know if that's considered discrimination. This is something we're researching with lawyers, but to a certain degree, insurance companies are allowed a certain ability to discriminate. They discriminate based on age. When your insurance rates go up, your car insurance will go up after the age of 25, but that's based on statistics, right?
Right.
You might just make the argument that we're obviously controversial and we're further liability that they're not willing to cover. So we don't know. We don't even know what our legal options are there. Right. We just have a bunch of things really kind of up in the air right now that are probably going to be up in the air for a while for a while longer until we know how this whole pandemic shakes out and once things get back into normal operation.
Yeah. I want to mention.
However, on the website, people can check on our menu. We have campaigns listed, and you can see some of the now. It's just, it won't give you a good idea of when any of this might be resolved at this point. Things seem to be coming along pretty well on some of these things, but then the plague struck.
Yeah.
We really just have to kind of concentrate on being a community for people. I think the isolation that people should be engaging in is going to be something that is going to have psychological effects on people too. And it's good if we can be a community for people online and have different events for people like you're doing now. I think this is a very important thing to be doing, and it's probably the best thing we can be doing as non-medical professionals. And also, of course, it should be noted that there are websites available that tell people how to create masks that can be used for medical personnel because they're running out of masks, or they can be used for other people who simply don't have them. And there's websites that tell you where you can drop some of these masks off if you have the ability to make them. I know Joanne Fabrics posted something on their website talking about how you can make a classified mask, what is it, N95 or something like that. And then there's also different drop-off points coming up. And that's something I'm hoping to get our chapters interested in doing, as well as hosting community events online.
No, that's great. I think that's a good opportunity for that. We have, very, very crafty group of people, particularly from what I've seen in the events that they've had in Florida, trying to start up the chapter and fundraise. Both of them were focused on kind of different types of arts like that. So I'm sure there's more than that out there that can help. I wanted to give you another chance, Doug, to plug the organization as well as yourself. And I want to give you another chance to talk about where they can go to find you personally to support what you're doing, since you're not drawing a salary from TST, and also how to connect with TST. And you mentioned your Twitter before, so I definitely want to do that again.
Yeah, on Twitter, I'm just at Lucien Greaves, and Lucien is with an E. Sometimes people get that wrong. So follow me there. My Patreon is Patreon/Lucien Greaves. And, if you're interested in merch or donating, there's the satanictemple.com. But on top of that, on top of everything you said, your impulse might be to just look and see if things are available on Amazon, but even check if your local independent theaters are hosting events and what they have available for people in this time. Or also be cognizant of your independent bookstores and other businesses that might really be suffering, and see what you can order from them instead of going to the mega giants first, because they all definitely need it.
Yeah. So mentioning some swag, I will say this, that over the years, we've got an ornament on our flying spaghetti monster tree. We've got some coffee mugs, beautiful coins, by the way, and all kinds of stuff. So definitely check that out. I want to put a plug in for that as well. And this has been a lot of fun, and I appreciate you joining us. Before I let you go, I want to ask you about the Salem Art Gallery. So people can come and see the organization once the doors open back up again. Talk about that for just a second, if you'd like.
Yeah, our headquarters doubles as a gallery as well. And we had a great exhibit set up currently, which unfortunately nobody can come to see now, but it also has a shop. And inside we have our famous Baphomet monument sitting in a room where we had to have the floor reinforced so it could hold up this 1.5 ton monument. But it's sitting right there. And we have a lecture room where in normal times we have people come in, and there's the weekly services and lecture events and things like that. We'll be very happy to get all that back in order when it happens. But that's in Salem, Massachusetts, and 64 Bridge Street. So put that somewhere on your future travel plans. That's right. Oddly enough, the way a lot of organizations kind of have to hide and need to hide in some cases, it's not hard to find your place
It's turned, the outside's turned black from a few years ago when you guys got hold of it, and it looks fantastic on the outside, and I look forward to coming and seeing you sometime soon. So thanks again, Doug. Appreciate you being here. Lucien Greaves, everybody, friend of the Central Florida Freethought community. We love you, man.
Great. Thank you so much. Anytime.
So let me share my screen here, and we'll finish things up with talking about some upcoming events. I want to say that we miss all of you that come to our events. Our educational events are now online. Our social events are now online. So we're trying really hard to keep the community together. Our next webinar like this one will be in 2 weeks on Sunday, August 19th, again at 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll have a presentation, as we talked about earlier, by author and journalist Catherine Stewart. She has a new book out that we talked about. It's called The Power Worshippers: Inside the Dangerous Rise of Religious Nationalism. So check that out wherever you buy books online at this point. And if you do that on Amazon, if you go to smile.amazon.com, you can support various organizations. I'm not sure if the Satanic Temple has that, but we certainly have that. So you can pick an organization at smile.amazon.com. For almost everything you buy, a small percentage of that will go to that nonprofit. And at that event in 2 weeks, CFFC Director Joseph Richardson, who is actually featured on one of the chapters, will be your host. So we're excited to check in with Catherine Stewart, and Joseph will be handling that. And she's going to talk about her research on that book and Christian nationalism. So it's right up our alley. We're continuing with our secular women events, and I wanted to make sure we talked about those at CFL Freethought on Meetup. So you can find us at CFL Freethought on Meetup. You can find us at CFL Freethought on Facebook. So check that out. That's an online event that you can get through meetup.com only. Also, Freethought Cafe events, we've got those scheduled online only. You can find those again at meetup.com only. We're trying to manage these Zoom events as best we can to make sure we protect the security of everybody that's there. So we're only putting these on Meetup. So thanks to everybody for their continued participation, including the hosts of those events. And those are, as you can see, pretty much every week for the next few weeks, and we'll begin scheduling again in May in the next couple of weeks. So we miss all of you. You're in our thoughts often, especially those of you most impacted by the current state of affairs. Whether you're in a healthcare system or any essential business, and especially those who are out of work right now due to no fault of your own, know that you're in our thoughts right now, and we look forward to reconnecting with you soon. And if you can, please join us online. Finally, if you have any feedback for us regarding the webinar today, or if you want to get monthly updates via email, you can find out how to do both of those things at our Contact Us page. That's cflfreethought.org/contact us. So have a great afternoon, and go wash your hands.
Oh, freedom from religion.